Welcome to today's CG Talk, Best Practices in Recruiting Black Tech Talent with Roz Francuz-Harris, who's head of DTC Talent Acquisition for WarnerMedia and HBO Max. I'll introduce Roz in just a moment. I'm Phil Terry. I'm really excited that Roz has joined us today. Not only is she a really talented recruiter herself and leader of recruiting teams, but she's a national leader in the conversation about how tech companies can recruit and retain more Black and people of color and LGBTQ tech talent. And I'll give you a hint, it's not a pipeline problem. An experienced recruiting leader, Roz has worked at some of the largest enterprises and fastest growing companies in tech and media, including Slack, Uber, and now WarnerMedia, HBO Max. She also runs, as I mentioned earlier, Y'all Hiring, a podcast and events company. And again, I'm going to insist you sign up for and listen to her podcast. It's really good. She's a great interviewer, and she really brings some terrific people onto her show. You will learn a lot if you listen to her podcast and get tips to great resources like the Next Play community, which you will hear about today. Roz is very passionate about them. And also the Next Play community she's going to share with you is an answer to a question that many of you have, i.e. Why recruiting diverse talent in the tech world is not a pipeline problem. You're going to hear me say that a few more times today. Roz's passion lies in creating access to high-paying roles for underrepresented communities. And she's really developed a reputation for building diverse recruiting teams at companies that reflect her personal values as well as the company's values. She's a champion for underrepresented and underserved communities and is striving for equity in the tech and media space through pipeline initiatives, hiring strategies, development opportunities, and retention-motivated programming. She identifies as a lesbian and her pronouns are she, her, and hers. Roz, again, thank you so much for being here. We're really excited and frankly fortunate to have some of your time and talent with us today.
Thank you so much, Phil, for having me. I really wouldn't want to be anywhere else right now, but with this group of folk who are really eager to learn. So I'm excited to be a part of the conversation.
Great. So I know you have some introductory comments that you're going to share with us, and then we're going to jump right into Q&A. We have a number of questions that were submitted ahead of time, which Roz and I have reviewed, and she's prepared to start answering those. And also, as we get talking, I encourage you to put into the chat window any questions or comments that you have, and I'll be monitoring those. So Roz, what would you like to start by sharing?
I'll just start by sharing a little bit about me. I've been in talent acquisition for 15 years, all in the tech space, whether it was large enterprise or a small startup. So a lot of the issues that I think we all are facing as an industry, I've gotten to see at different facets of its life cycle. I think what has really been unique was this year was also the year that I launched my podcast, Y'all Hiring. And the entire reason behind us launching this was I was trying to scale myself because I couldn't help every single job seeker. And I said, I have access to all these industry peers who have the ability to share the same information with recruiting leaders, companies, and job seekers as I do. Let's scale this thing out, right?
Yeah.
And what I found is that as it was taking off, I realized more of the conversations that we were having on this platform had been happening behind closed doors. And so while these things felt very common nature for me, I realized that the world weren't having these conversations openly, not this candidly, not in a safe space. And so, I'll go back to it, as an employee throughout my career, there have been times where I've been underpaid, underleveled, underutilized, and underdeveloped. And without knowing what to do or having a people team that knew how to develop me, it made it difficult, to grow or to thrive in certain environments. And so here I am, 15 years later, and I've got a lot of experience now that I can look back and say, oh, I could have done this differently, or this would have been helpful. And so what I try to do now is help organizations and individuals kind of shortcut some of the mistakes I had to make or learn the tough way. And you don't have to lose good people, right? Because you haven't figured it out. There are other options, and I want to be a part of that solution.
Yeah, that's great. Well, one of the questions you were most enthralled with, or thought we should start with anyway, was what are the biggest mistakes that you see companies making in attempting to hire and retain Black talent, people of color, LGBTQ? What are some of
Yeah,
the mistakes?
that's a fun question, Phil. There's a lot of mistakes. But I'm going to start with some of the obvious ones and maybe not so obvious for some of you on the call. I'll say for a while now, we've been having the conversation around underrepresented minorities in tech, whether it's women or African American, Latinx community. We've been having that conversation. But I think what happened in May, right, with as a nation and under our current administration and all of the tension that we've seen politically, I think it forced companies to realize that these were no longer separate issues that lived outside of our walls.
Right.
And so some of the initial mistakes, I just watched them happen and I was kind of devastated. I was hoping it wouldn't happen this way. Right. But there was this need to respond immediately. If I didn't have a strategy, I had to put 4 principles together and then look, we promoted a Black woman and now we're going to go and try to get involved with all the HBCUs to now create a pipeline. Yeah. And what I fear most is that we are not adequately preparing our current workforce and our current work environments to even be able to bring in these underrepresented communities from every way, from a compensation to a culture to a development and even a retention standpoint. When we talk about, this is gonna get mistakes, typically mistakes often happen when there is pressure to respond immediately.
A kind of reactive mentality.
Exactly. And that's when movements like this become moments, frankly.
Right.
Exactly when
instead of it becoming a movement, it's a moment, right?
Exactly, because we solved for this little thing. Yes, we did it. I hired a Black woman.
Yeah.
We are diverse.
Yeah.
And that solves nothing, and so I think what I've been pleased about, at least from my employer and a few other larger ones at least, and some small ones, I've seen some companies say, yes, we're going to do something, but we need to look at ourselves a little deeper. I've seen a lot of consulting firms be brought in to do audits to really then paint a better picture of where are we? Where do we have inequities? Where do we have talent gaps? And then put a plan in place. And that plan cannot be exclusive of all the facets of what makes up the company culture.
Right. And you guys are doing this now. You're in the middle of this kind of an audit.
Oh yeah, we're doing that now. We've put some initial things in place, as a company, and then we have a long roadmap of things that we will be doing over the next 3 to 4 years.
Is there a particular, and you may not know or want to say, but is there a particular recruiting firm or set of recruiting firms that you think are good at this kind of audit?
Oh yeah, I would recommend Paradigm if you are a larger company. They do an amazing job. It's thorough, I'll tell you that. If you are a smaller company, and they're kind of impacted heavily right now with all the requests that they've gotten. Sure. But there is another firm called I think it's called Adaptive, but I'll be sure to share a link with you afterwards. Okay. And they're really amazing because they use what I would call a more modern technique to diversity and inclusion. It is not PC. It is not corporate spiel. So if you are a smaller company and or a medium-sized company or even a large company with a culture of realness, I'd recommend this company for sure. Because what I think they do a really good job of, especially if your audience is generally white men, right? Is first of all, breaking down the defense mechanism. If we're talking to a cisgendered straight white male, it is very hard, and I empathize to have a conversation and say, I want to talk about the systemic racism in your company. I'm not racist. What do you mean? And that is a very fair reaction,
Yeah.
You know, and I joke with my California friends. I'm like, hey, this is a new for you, isn't it? You know, it's
Yeah.
a wake up call. And so they do a very good job of removing the defense of, you know, this is a global issue that we've all
Right.
been conditioned in from the time we could breathe on this planet, right?
Right. Right.
And that's where they start. And they start with everything from the programming we had as children and how, if
Right.
any of you Dragon Ball Z fans out there, you know, even when he powers up, right? He goes blonde hair, blue eyes. That is that shows
Right.
you that he's stronger in the
Right.
lighter, whiter phase, right? So they even work through all of that kind of stuff, which didn't kind of like, it breaks you down a bit. And you're like, oh, okay, it's not
Yeah.
just me. We've all been conditioned here. So I
Right.
will for sure share those links with you afterwards, because
Yeah.
I think before anyone starts to react, you need to get a very good understanding of where you actually are,
Yeah.
who you have on the team and where they
Yeah.
are, and then offer some resources for support for them, because it is
Right.
a big transition for everyone.
Yeah. That's really great. And I think, you know, one of the things that we've seen a lot of, right, is some amount of recruiting, and then it's kind of a golden door, right? They come in, they go out, because the culture is not ready for it. And senior management, one of the questions we had that I know you also wanted to address, that came in over email, was around how to elicit agreement from upper management for diversity and inclusion efforts when culture is not given the same importance as, let's say, competition or performance.
Mm-hmm.
Um, how do you think, how would you answer that?
You know, that's a fantastic question. Thank you to whoever sent that question in.
Yeah.
A number of companies have tried a number of ways to do this, and I'll give you some ways that have failed real quick.
Great. Okay.
And I'm pretty sure I hear these being brought up again, and I'm like,
Yeah.
guys, this failed already. Oh, we should bonus our executives off of diversity and inclusion, right? That's
Uh,
one. The second one that I've seen that has really failed is these blitz hiring initiatives without the internal work being done.
yeah.
So I will share some past company stuff that I thought was actually really well.
Okay.
When I was at Uber,
Yeah.
we went through a very public ridicule,
Yes.
because there were some serious issues with sexual harassment and allegations
Yeah.
that had been made in the company.
Yeah.
Um, and what I was very fortunate about at the time was working with a CHRO, Leanne Horsey, who I really, really respect in this industry. We weren't going to wait until the investigation or trial ended before we started to do something.
Right.
But we had to figure out, you know, how to go about that, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we were trying to do is, how do you hold management accountable to diversity and inclusion efforts? And what we looked at was the way that we were performance managing senior leadership, as well as hiring managers or anyone that led a team, was largely performance driven off of the role that they were in. But there was no cultural aspect or company citizenship aspect to how we performance managed. And in our company at Uber, your performance management or your performance review was largely tied to your bonus compensation and any equity refreshers you might receive. And that's probably common for a lot of folks on here. So I think if you were to, one thing that I think was really effective was when we added that citizenship and diversity components to performance reviews. And we were very intentional with explaining ahead of time. They didn't just show up on your review, but what it meant to be held responsible for that, everyone throughout the entire company. Whether it was referrals, whether it was volunteering at events that were specific to whether it was women in tech or African-American tech or Latinx in tech, whether it was working on what we called moonshot projects that would impact those communities. Those were things that we actually measured you on from a performance standpoint. What was amazing about that was that they directly impacted engagement of communities. They directly impacted talent acquisition. I'll give you an example of one where we had an individual who went to a meeting for an organization in Sacramento, California, and it was called BWU, Black Women United. And the organization was largely focused on mental health for Black women. Well, Uber's a rideshare company. One opportunity was, hey, we could actually help provide rides for their members to get to and from health appointments. And so that started off as like a community initiative. And before
Right.
you know it, we were getting referrals for employment from it. And so those are things that each employee can be held accountable for within
Yeah.
the organization.
Yeah. And were you saying at the very top, were you saying you should bonus execs off DE&I?
No.
You were saying no. I thought so. Okay.
Here's the thing. I shouldn't say no so firmly, but
Okay.
when you tie compensation to something like diversity and inclusion, my opinion is that what you will get is a lot of check marks, right?
How to check the box thinking.
Make sure I'm getting paid.
Yeah.
But the effort behind the development and the retention of those folks will not be there.
Yeah.
Slack, and I'm giving them a shout out here, had an amazing program that they called Rising Tides. And Janae Simon, who's the diversity and inclusion leader over there, worked her butt off on that project. But it was an example of if you're gonna add a component, if you can say, I want to compensate my executives for diversity and inclusion, you cannot and you should not do that without some sort of retention mechanism tied to that.
Yeah.
And so what Rising Tides was at Slack was it was only open to underrepresented minorities who were in active ERGs. And when you were given a performance review of a high performer, you were now eligible to join this cohort. In that cohort, you were given an executive, C-level executive, who would be your mentor. And they would spend 6 to 9 months mentoring you. And after that, they would then spend the next 3 months being a sponsor for you, and for whether it was for a promotion, a new role, or even to leave the company and go somewhere else, they would use their network to help you. And that's one thing that I thought was extremely impressive, because when you talk about equity for underrepresented communities, sponsorship has to be a part of that conversation. That is something you can tie to executives.
Right. That's something you tie. And we have a number of people on the call who I think know the difference between sponsorship and mentorship, but for those who may not, could you just explain?
Yeah, absolutely. Mentorship is something that we can all stumble upon. We will find great people alongside us who can help develop us in a skill, whether it's one that we are lacking or will need for a career field. And that's what mentorship generally is. Sponsorship, however, is taking that to the next level. It's where not only have I helped you and given you feedback on the skill and work with you, but then I'm going to go to my friend Phil here and say, Phil, I have helped Brittany. She's amazing. You need to hire her for this open role you have.
Right.
You need to interview her and consider her.
Right.
Sponsorship is using your privilege and power, whether that be because of your title, ethnicity, or whatever, this gender, whatever it is, to help someone who does not have that luxury you do.
Yeah. And mentorship is sometimes available, but sponsorship is really lacking, right?
It's terrible.
Yeah. That's it.
I won't say I'll say this, and I might ruffle some feathers here. It's not lacking for everyone, because it's there, right. But I will say for underrepresented minorities.
That's what I meant. For people of color, LGBTQ.
It's definitely lacking.
For white men, there's a lot of sponsorship. And they don't even know the word necessarily. They just do it for each other, right? Mm-hmm. And I guess I'm happy to ruffle those feathers. I mean, I think it's just what it is. Like, it's clearly how the world works, right? Like, it's okay that it's there. The problem is it's not everywhere else.
Right.
And how do we change that? And how do we, those of us who have privilege of one kind or another, how do we use that and give that in ways that can change things? You shared with me, Roz, I think let's dive in a little bit to, underdevelopment. And you shared with me that that happened to you earlier in your career, right? Can you tell us a little bit about that and like why, what you see happen when companies will often promote people too fast and not give them the support they need? Yeah.
Yeah. I think it happens a lot to, and I'm gonna call out a specific demographic here, especially Black women.
Yeah.
I'd roll the dice and say that Black women within an organization are some of your most hardworking employees. They will take on as much as you put on them. We will try to thrive our best in that environment. It's how we're raised. It's a cultural aspect of our race. You know, the independence and the by any means necessary is just a part of our culture. However, in the workplace, that becomes our detriment as well. And what typically tends to happen, and I'm seeing a lot of it right now because of this need to react. You may have a high performing underrepresented minority on your team. And this reaction is to promote them or put them in a position of leadership. And that's fantastic. What has happened and what does happen far too often is that the resources for development are not put in place for that individual. There is no development plan since I promoted you, right? And when we promote someone, we know that there's still room to grow into this job level, right? We tend to forget that we need to be actively doing that. And that could look like a number of different ways. What I also see is not only are we not providing the resources for the development, we're not even making sure that the individual either feels that they have the advocacy or they can ask for what they need. And that's something that we assume, right? Where you're going to ask for what you need, so we'll figure it out along the way. But I only know what I know.
Right.
You know?
Right. And by the way, asking for help, which is something I talk a lot about, it's hard for everyone to do, but culturally, if you've been told since you were younger that you're not as smart, that you don't belong, etc., you're going to ask for help even less, because and by the way, you've been told that asking for help is a sign of weakness for you, not if you're a white man, but for you, right? So you're not going to ask for help. And I'm really appreciate you sharing this story, because I think one of the things that I fear, and I know you too as well, is that when you make that kind of reactive promotion, you don't support them, they get set up to fail, right? And then it hurts the company because they leave. But it hurts the person. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Not only does it hurt the person, man, it hurts everyone around them. I'll just use myself as an example. You know, when I first, got promoted into management to lead people, all right, I was a strong IC. I was very successful as an individual contributor, but there were significant skill changes going from IC to manager that I need to develop. And when I was promoted with, here's your team, go get them. Go get them, you know, and it was a struggle. People were quitting. I was getting feedback left and right about how terrible I was. But I was never getting like, here's some resources to help you. And I am just very fortunate that I happened to go to a conference and meet a Black man who happened to be about 4 or 5 levels above me at that time, who was open to mentoring me. And I was sharing some of the things that I had been going through at work and the feedback I was getting. And he was like, oh, well, here's some training you should take. Here's a resource for you. Here, and you know, I'll never forget that. I enrolled in my first situational leadership training. And that was the one of the most impactful resources I ever had. But I wouldn't have known that had I not been venting in a safe space, my community, with another Black person to share what I was going through. Why weren't those resources made available to me at work? You know, and then after I brought them into the workplace and was sharing with my manager at the time, then all of it came. It's like, oh yeah, we can send you here. We'll do this. We'll do that.
Right.
But I had to know to ask for that. Yeah. And that's what I'm saying that we do far too often to individuals that we promote without supporting them. On top of that, the other thing that we don't realize is that every individual around them, especially if they have other underrepresented minorities on their teams, are now having a negative impact. And we're all going to just leave. We leave the company, we go tell about that negative impact, you know, and then when someone asks about my experience at XYZ company, I just flat out say, I'm not comfortable referring anyone in there. I had a terrible experience. Yeah.
So that's a powerful and important story. I'm so happy. Was that a conference, by the way, that we should know about that you went to?
Afrotech. You should know about Afrotech for sure.
Afrotech. Okay, great. And thank God that happened. Or thank you for going there and thank that gentleman for extending his help. I'm guessing there are people right now on the line who are thinking, oh my God, I bet we do this at our company, to some of the Black women and others that we promote, right?
You do. And it's
And
okay.
so what should they do today to try to address that?
Yeah.
What would you suggest?
It's okay. It's not the end of the world because we're now aware of it. I think what you all should really do is take a step back and look at your promotion programs. Because with every promotion, there should be a support program that goes behind that. Whether it be, hey, at 6 months in this role, we're going to enroll you into career coaching. I mean, I'd recommend Better Up as a service for anyone to take advantage of. But we're going to enroll you in Better Up so that you can have a coach who is not someone that manages you, who you can share things with a little candidly and get some feedback, right? That's an example of a program method you put in place. Another one would be, what trainings and development tools need to be in place at this particular job for this company? Whether that is, we promoted someone into management for talent acquisition who probably doesn't realize how significant program management is going to be a part of their role. Maybe we should recommend a program management training for this individual, right? Or whether I've promoted a person as a director now, and maybe they don't understand exactly how significant those executive presentations are going to be. And so we might need to enroll them in a speaking course. So you should definitely start to map out, and it's not a knock on your employee, but you should be able to say, hey, here's what got you promoted. Here are the gaps that you have that you need to learn over the course of the next 12 months.
Right.
And here's what I'm going to do as your manager or leader to support you in learning those things. And we'll have check-in points monthly to see how we're progressing.
Yeah.
Most people will try to say, oh yeah, we do that. I have one-on-ones all the time with my employee.
Yeah.
But what is the quality of your one-on-one? That's a great place to even start.
Right.
What are the quality of the resources that you're providing? Have you offered a coaching solution to your employees?
Yeah.
Or, oh, well, manager's coach. Do you think I want to have a conversation about all my failures and insecurities with my manager?
Right.
As imposter syndrome is sitting in my new role, I need to now be able to tell my manager, hey, I'm not so sure I can handle this presentation tomorrow.
Right.
No.
Right.
So that's the things that I'm referring to when I say, and especially with your people of color, you have to do this because they're not going to just say to you, yeah, I'm not good at this. What tool can I use to get better?
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, we had one of the things we do with the councils is this kind of external coaching, but it's peer coaching, right? So it's executive, but the key is they're outside the company, right? So it's that safe space, and it's even more important here. For our listeners, I think it would be helpful to understand. Roz, you and I have talked about this, and most of the people who are here on the call know this. That I was a community organizer years ago, and I kind of, when in my early 20s, went through discovering what racism was, as what and everything I didn't freaking know about it, right? And that was tough. That was a tough process, but one that invaluable in my life. I'm really deeply indebted to that experience. So when you say, for example, that people of color, African-American women and so on, are not going to tell you what they need, can you, for this group who I think is more naive about racism, that they're just coming to this, for some of them, the first time in a serious way in their lives, right? Some of these work professionals. Can you help them understand that a little bit better?
Yeah, and I'm going to speak super candidly here. So
please do.
If you have a question, feel free to chat. You have to understand that we do not trust you.
Yeah.
I want to say that. Just let it sit for a second. I don't trust you. Based on my experience as a Black lesbian woman in America, there have been little examples of where I can trust a white man, right? And I want to say that, and I want to let it sit for a second.
Yeah.
Now, what we do when we haven't been able to go through the experiences that say I have now, where I have some great white men in my life who I trust.
Yeah.
What we then do is we compartmentalize our lives as a way to cope and sustain the workday.
Yeah.
The things that we experience in the workplace that probably have gone over your heads for years, decades, that you didn't even know were having such an impact on us. And I'll give you a raging example that I can still feel when I get mad. Charlottesville. Do you guys remember Charlottesville when that happened?
Yeah.
I remember going to work, trying to keep it together, but it was such a hard weekend for me. I remember that Sunday night thinking maybe I should call in, maybe I should go, I don't know. But I went to work, and what was the most devastating feeling I felt was everyone else was just moving along like nothing had happened.
They were not aware, barely aware of it. Yeah.
I could look around and people, no one had the burden that I had, you know, and I was like, why is that? Yeah. And then I fast forward a little bit, and I remember there was another scenario where one night we went to bed to the death of Fidel Castillo and woke up to Philando Castillo and woke up to Alton Sterling.
Yeah.
And I remember just being devastated. And then I go to work, and you want me to tell you about my weekend?
Right.
You know, it's devastating. Right. So that was one thing. We don't even talk to you about that in the workplace. Other things that we do is like right now we're talking about diversity and inclusion, and in the workplace, how many of you are tapping on your Black employees and having these discussions without even knowing how it's actually impacting them, or the magnitude that they have to wake up to every day being Black in this country, right? And so that's what I mean when I say, like, it's hard. It's hard. There is so much that your Black employees were going through that, you know, I just can't even imagine that you even know. I think now there may be some more awareness to it. Yeah. Some of the other things that are small that happen in the workplace, or when we want to do team outings, how, you know, we think of these inclusive outings that we want to do. And it's so funny. I can pretty much, I guarantee if I polled Black employees at most of these companies and I said, hey, the last company picnic that you went to, did you enjoy yourself? The answer is no.
Right.
They're extremely stressful, and they're usually not activities, you know, that we would want to do. Now, I've learned to love cornhole. It's one of my favorite games. I want to thank all the white guys that ever had me drinking and playing cornhole. I just got some custom boards, and I grew, right? I learned to like that. But I will tell you, I've been invited to play golf. I've been invited to cornhole. We've had team outings at bars, things that don't feel very inclusive, things you might want to know about, you know, the Black community before you start planning events for them. Is think about it. Most of your Black employees are actually religious. Most of them are Christian based. So if we're going to have an out at a bar, that might not feel like something they want to do.
Yeah.
So, I mean, things like that you all have never thought about, that have just one by one piled on. Not to mention we get into the semantics of hair and dress code and other things that have impacted that. So that's the starting place. So now you're coming to a conversation where you've, to a degree, there's been thousands of conversations that you haven't been included in, right? The second thing I want to add to this is that, you know, as a Black employee, regardless if you want to check out, and no matter how bad you want to compartmentalize it, your life, there's always this responsibility to succeed, because the entire race is always on your back and on your shoulders. Yeah. Right. And so I think now companies have a very unique opportunity to share that burden, to take it away and say, no, we are going to do this work. Yeah. We want to do this work. We see how it's impacted you and as a country, and we can do better. Yeah. That's a really important point. And and by the way, let's go back to the very beginning of what you were saying. And I would like to say that again, like, you do not trust us, right? White people. And to let the white people on the phone really like hear that for a minute and take some sense of what that might even, you know, mean to live your life in a way like that, right? Like, you know, when I became a community organizer, I had been an activist, you know, in college, and I had gone to Africa. I had spent some time in Nigeria. I had worked with Africans. I came to New York City, and here I thought, okay, and I started working like Reverend Al Sharpton in the 80s and stuff, and I thought, you know, and like in about 10 minutes, I realized I did not know what the fuck I was talking about. Like,
there was so much that I did not know. And I had to go through an intense and it's still ongoing experience of
Yeah.
learning what that means,
Yeah.
And so I think part of what I would like to say to the white people on the call is put some work in. Put some work in here. Like it's actually, you can Google, you can actually start to learn stuff. There's great books, there's Googles, there's podcasts like yours, there's what we're doing right now. But put some work in. We can change this dynamic, but you've got to put some work in. We have to put some work in. Like this,
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what I hear you saying too, when you say, don't make a reactive decision. Like, we're not going to change this tonight. This is a multi-decade process in my experience, and make a commitment now to start learning and be willing to not know. You do not know. We do not know what the hell we're talking about when it comes to race. And I include myself in that. And I've done a lot more work than almost every white person I know, but I still don't know because I grew up white and I went through all the experiences I went through, even though some of them were really hard. I had enormous privilege. All right, let's talk a little bit about recruiting.
Yeah. And I did just post in the chat, by the way.
Good.
I actually misspoke. It wasn't adaptive. It's Awaken. Awaken is the organization. That's the diversity consultant that I just shared in the chat with you all.
That's great. And they're the ones who can come in and do that audit.
They can do the audit. They can also do programming to help you start the conversation with your employees. And that's going to be very helpful. I think what is also happening is where a lot of conversations are starting within the workplace. And it's a little bit dangerous because you don't have professionals in the workplace that can actually help resolve some of the feelings that are going to come up, some of the solutions that need to be driven. There's really no one there to do that. This is an organization that can help you with that. A lot of people are having discussion groups and forums, and there's not a psychologist in the room. There's no one from a diversity consultant in the room. So I'd highly recommend these folks to help first do the audit of your organization, but then be a good starting place on how to move forward.
It's terrific. This is great. And I think you see in the chat, a lot of people are responding to what you're saying, Roz, and thanking you for your candor. I wonder, so one of the myths that you're so good at exploding is this, it's a pipeline problem. There are no Black or Latinx candidates we can hire. We have to start in elementary school or something. So would you talk a little bit about what you've been teaching companies?
Absolutely. So when I hear the pipeline conversation, what I typically will respond with is, I'll ask a question that's usually like, hey, Phil, do you fish? And sometimes I'll get like, my grandpa did. I'm like, oh, great. Did he fish in a forest by chance? And they look at me like I'm odd. And I'm pretty sure he fished in a lake or a pond or a river. He went where the fish were, right? And that's kind of how I feel about the pipeline issue. We say that from the comfort of San Francisco, which has a population of like 2% Black people, or we say it from, Denver, Colorado. I think we have to understand that there really is not a pipeline issue. There's two organizations that I want to share with you all. One is Next Play. Next Play Events is an organization ran by 3 Black men, all of which who have come from talent acquisition backgrounds. What is so special about their community, it's Black and Latinx professionals, and there's really 2 parts of their community. It's the senior level professionals and then the university age professionals. They've got 5,000 community members that are Black and Latinx, all working in the tech space.
5,000.
5,000.
Not 5, not 500, 5,000.
I remember the first time I went to a Next Play event, and I was myself shocked. I was like, where have all of these Black people been? Where were they when I was looking for a community? And I've gotten to know them over the last 4 years, and what they do is really remarkable. They infuse Black and Latin culture into all of their events. They invite C-suite individuals from companies. They've had the CEO of Slack spoke when I was there. We've had folks who really go to the community and say, hey, we don't have it figured out, but we want you. We want you. We know that we need you. We can't make a product that serves everyone without everyone. You know, when I was at Slack and we partnered with NextPlay, we made 7 hires from that event, one event. You know, that was great for a small company like that.
That's great.
The other organization I want to recommend to you all is called Black is Tech. They are out of I believe they're headquartered in New York, but they do a similar programming. Theirs is way more specific in technology. So if you're looking for AI or machine learning or data scientists or something specific, that's a great organization to go to. And they can make custom programming for your organization. But I highly recommend the 2 of those orgs.
And the NextPlay, you've used them a lot. I mean, you know these guys really well.
Oh yeah.
And Roz did a whole podcast with one of the team there, and you've used them like a bunch of times for hiring. And when Slack, was it at Slack that you did that event? Yeah. And then as a company, did you like pay a sponsorship fee or something to go and be there?
I did. Yeah. So I'll share a little bit about it. So there is a fee that you'll pay. And of that fee, it's really crumbs when you think about the cost to hire. Like one hire makes it worth it. But part of that sponsorship is going to give you access to 1 or 2 of their events, depending on what level you pick. They do Spotlight. They do a Spotlight event. They do an HBCU event, and they also do a anniversary event. Those are their special events that they will host. And then part of that sponsorship also gets you an event. They're very selective. They only take a small amount of sponsors per year because they can only do so many programs. But if you are selected, then you get a special spotlight that is just for your company. So everyone that they are inviting and sourcing and bringing to you has an interest in your company. And at the end of the event, you're given all these leads and warm leads. It's great. It's wonderful. And we actually have an event coming up with them here in the next month for WarnerMedia specifically. So I highly recommend them. So
obviously they're doing Zoom events now. Is that what they're doing? Or
so they actually use a platform called Hopin. And if you haven't had a chance to use Hopin yet, it will allow you to engage with job seekers. You can have a main stage to you can have rooms, you can talk one-on-one, and it's a great platform.
That's great. All right. So, and how do people get in touch with the NextPlay folks? Is there?
So you can go to nextplayevents.com. That's them. Actually, I'll post that in the chat as well.
Perfect. And can they say that Roz sent them?
Yes, please do. Please say that Roz. These guys are great. You know, Leslie Touche, who is the founder, was on LinkedIn's diversity team for about 5 years before branching out and doing this. Brian Carmichael, who leads their recruiting division. I've tried to recruit him several times to be on my own.
You said that in the podcast.
He's incredible. What I love is that they don't make companies feel guilty, right, about not being able to have done this before. You know, and instead they really are a partner in helping bridging the gap and building a relationship with the community. And I want to stress relationship, because as you start to try to engage with underrepresented and underserved communities, it can't just be a hiring event that we do.
It can't be transactional. It's got to be relational.
Transactional. It's got to be relational, you know, and there are studies and case studies, examples that will show what happens when you make it a relationship versus a transaction. And so these guys get it. They absolutely get it.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so thank you for that. And those are 2 resources. And by the way, can recruiters join the NextPlay community as recruiters?
Yes, actually they love when recruiters join. Recruiters join creates a direct access for their community members to companies, and that's what it's all about.
So everyone who's on this call right now, afterwards, you're going to do a couple things. You're going to sign up for Roz's podcast and start listening to that. And you're going to go to NextPlay and join that community, right? There's at least a couple of things. And you're going to get an audit that from one of these firms if you're not doing that already, which I'm guessing many folks are not. All right, what else? Let's look in the list of questions here. I know there was, oh yeah, let's talk about, did we already address this? How to elicit agreement from upper management?
I think we kind of did, but we didn't really start with it. I think
Yeah.
for the leaders on this call, and I think we do have some leaders on this call,
Yeah, we do.
um, there has to be an agreement that happens at the executive level,
Yep.
and some way to hold them accountable to ensuring that the managers on their teams or the ICs on their teams are holding the line on what the company is going to do from a diversity standpoint.
Yeah.
Whether that is engagement activities through an ERG to drive community efforts, whether that is putting in place some sort of Rooney Rule-like, and I say Rooney Rule-like because the Rooney Rule can be extremely manipulated, and so I'm very careful with that.
Hey, do you know, I got to believe everyone knows the Rooney Rule, but if you can just explain what.
Sure. So the Rooney Rule was a rule put in place by a NFL owner, which was we're not going to hire a coach until we interview a Black coach and a white coach. And that way, once we've interviewed both coaches, we can make the best decision. But I want to make sure we see that. And by me describing it that way, you can see how easy that can be manipulated.
Right.
Which is why I say Rooney Rule-like, ensuring that candidates are actually reviewed and seriously considered for opportunities, but also your job descriptions. There has to be some sort of exercise done to determine if you even have inclusive language there. So leaders shouldn't be opening jobs that are extremely narrow, right?
Yeah.
And I think we do that often, whether it be through the specific university requirements we add, the years of experience or skills that we add, and we're not as equipped to evaluate talent as we should be. Yeah. So we rely on false indicators like years of experience or you went to this school to help us rather than our own ability to be able to assess these things.
Yeah. One of the questions that came up, by the way, was about interviewing. How do I learn interviewing and job descriptions? So on the point of job descriptions, if we've got a white manager writing a job description, how would they figure out if their language is inclusive or not, do you think? What would you recommend?
I don't know that they would figure it out on their own. So I'm going to recommend, they use some tools. There's a few, Textio is one that I think most of you may know about already. That really helps you throw your job description into it, and then it kind of like will highlight. And if you don't know it, I'm going to share it as well. Don't worry. I will share that one right now. But it will analyze your job description for words that like passionate or other things like that to help you. And then it will make recommendations to change it.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say beyond the job description is that years of experience, right? We really need to be careful with that. I saw a tweet that was so funny, and I hate that I can't remember what specific technology it was, but they were denying him for an interview because he didn't have 7 years of experience with this specific technology. And he says, I didn't even get a chance to tell them that I invented it, and it's only been around for 5 years.
For 5 years, right?
Right. So that's something that I think we really should be a little bit more careful with, because when we do this between 5 and 7 years or 3 to 5 years of experience, we are essentially cutting out some folks, especially people of color, who've been doing that job for 2 to 3, probably better than the person you're looking for 5 to 7. And so I think we should utilize better tools. I also want to recommend Byteboard is a tool. If you all haven't seen that, for those of you that are working in the tech space and trying to assess engineers, this is a tool that's amazing. It's a little pricey, so I'm not gonna even put it out there like it's not. It's a pretty expensive tool, but what Byteboard, it's created by 2 amazing women founders who were at Google. Both of them are underrepresented minorities. One was a staff level engineer, one was a senior product manager, and they determined like, hey, I actually think we are also implying biases in our interview now that we're interviewing, this way. And, you know, Google has an amazing incubator where they allow employees to submit ideas. And this is one of those ideas that came out of there. It got funded and it's been doing fantastic. Lyft is a company that uses them thoroughly. And you all know Lyft's been able to really change their culture.
Yeah, we have an African-American woman member from Lyft, in fact.
This tool has helped them tremendously. Dropbox is now using it. Robinhood uses it. We're going through an assessment to see if we can use it right now. It's an incredible tool. The feedback that we get from women and people of color as candidates in this tool, they're like, wow, I've never been evaluated in a way where I felt like my skills were actually being evaluated and not CS theory and fundamentals, right? And so I think we have to look at, when we talk about interviewing, we have to look at our interview practice to see where we are exclusive, where it's not inclusive, you know, and accessibility has to be a part of that conversation. When you look at underrepresented communities, we haven't had the same upbringing in the sense of the access to technology trainings. You know, I'll give you an example. We hosted a summer camp at Uber, and I didn't have one Black student in my summer camp, not one. And so those are situations that we're not put in. So when we go into a whiteboarding interview, it's kind of scary. It's nerve-wracking. Anxiety is just written all over the candidate's face, and you can see it. But yet we don't offer any customizations or any flexibility. These are the types of tools that we are going to have to put in place if we truly want to be a more inclusive workforce and put ourselves in a position to bring in more underrepresented talent.
Yeah, that's great. Wow, we've got 5 minutes left. Okay, and I'm seeing stuff in the chat. Okay. So what would you like to conclude with, Roz? What parting thoughts do you have? How can we help these listeners make a more long-term change here? And you've outlined a lot of great stuff. I really want them to act on what you've said today. What support do you need? Maybe that's the way.
I think the thing is that I want us to also understand that, you know, when we talk about the work of diversity and inclusion, we're talking about it from a business standpoint. And at the end of the day, what matters to business leaders is essentially ROI, right? Well, what's bottom line? How does it impact the bottom line? And I will tell you, and a lot of great companies that have achieved this will also tell you that diversity is good for the bottom line. If you are a company that's making a product, you want that product to reach as many people as possible. You cannot make that product reach the Black community without them at the table. Same for women, same for LGBTQ. And so I don't want you to think about this work that we're doing or trying to do right now as just, you know, the right thing to do, because it is the right thing to do. It's also really good for business. You know, I remember, and you can YouTube this video, but there's a video about the technology that was created in the automatic hand washers, right? When you're in the airport, you're washing your hand.
Right.
The next time we're doing that, if there's a Black person next to you, watch how many times it takes them to throw their hands through it before it finally catches on. And I actually have to turn my hands on the upside to get it to come on. And that was because the technology was never tested on a Black skin.
Right.
And so when you think about the products that we're making, the things that we're doing, we want them to be inclusive. We want Black people to be a part of that conversation. We have to take a look at ourselves and what we're doing and provide more resources. The links and the tools that I've given you all today will be tremendous benefits to you in helping you start this change. I think it's wild to think that overnight we're all going to cure systemic racism on our own. And we're going to disassemble it within our organizations. These things have been intact for hundreds of years. So it's not just going to go away magically. But we can start to do the work slowly. And we have resources. You are not on your own, and you do not have to figure this out by yourself. I would really recommend starting with those resources that I've shared with you today. And maybe they're too expensive. Maybe we can find you an alternative or one that's like that, but more affordable for the size of your company. But I truly think that was that's what I wanted to leave you all with more than anything today, were some resources that could help you.
Yeah, that's so wonderful. Really, I want to ask everyone on the call to join me in applauding and do it virtually in the chat. Roz, thank you, not just for being here today, but for being out in front on these issues for a long time, and for building the, the knowledge, the experience, the community that you've built, that can help so many others. And you're just an inspiration. I do want to put in one more plug for you. So I do want you to go listen to her podcast. It's a great podcast. You're such a warm and welcoming interviewer, Roz. It's really lovely to listen to you. You also, though, either when the pandemic is over, are you going to get back into are you going to do events virtually, or are you going to do them in person, or you have some events that you do as well, right?
COVID has made things very interesting. So we did in-person events to really help facilitate conversations like this. But we're gonna put the brakes on that now. But because we're putting the brakes on that, I am trying to make myself more available to organizations, especially smaller ones that are trying to do this work. So I can be a resource for you in that avenue. And we're gearing up for season 2 of the podcast, so you can check that out as well. But for now, it's podcast and consulting. That's basically it.
So people can hire you, right?
People can hire me. People can hire me for conversations right now around this
fantastic topic. I know, and I know some of our members were already interested, and we've started those. But let's promote that. I'd love to see more of these people come and hire you, and y'all hiring. Well, thank you so much. You see in the chat here, right? All of the wonderful comments. Excellent presentation. Thank you. Yes. Thank you all for being here today. And let's start this change. It is a long change. It's a long-term change, but we can make differences right away by doing some of the things that Roz talked about. So thank you, Roz.
Thank you. It's a long game, folks. Don't burn yourselves out so quickly.
Yeah.
Have grace with yourself, learn, own when you mess up, just say you messed up, and we can work together to do better. But please be kind to yourself in this line of work, because it is exhausting. But when you feel exhausted, think to yourself, that's probably how the Black girl next to me feels, probably times 10. So be kind to yourself, give yourself a break. You should not have already known this, so don't beat yourself up.
Yeah, no, you're so giving and generous, Roz. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.